Hi, this is Naomi with Sword and Steel, and today we are going to be assembling the M10 Wolverine Tank Destroyer. The Wolverine is the only one in this kit, as the M10 Achilles is a separate model. So first of all, if you were looking to see what magnetization or assembly options this tank destroyer has, then you are in luck, because I can tell you right now that there aren't really any. With the exception of a pintle mounted HMG that can be added to the turret or left off according to the bolt action card rules, there's only one way to build this tank destroyer, and that HMG doesn't require magnetization. Gravity will hold it in place just fine if you didn't want to glue it. There is an American crew and a British crew to choose from, and though I don't see how often a person would choose to magnetize his crew, it would be a very simple magnetization to do the crew settle onto invisible platforms in the turret, which you'll see if you watch this video. But I do have some notes on assembling this tank destroyer, like an extra piece that isn't mentioned anywhere on the guide, and a couple pieces that are mentioned on the guide but are missing from my sprue, as well as a couple tips that might make building this tank a little easier. So I hope you enjoy. Also, if you were building this for the just released war game Achtung Panzer, which you should absolutely try out if you like World War tank warfare, because I am having a blast with it, then the only thing to keep in mind, as with all tanks and anything else with rotating turret for Achtung Panzer, is that you do not want to glue the turret into place. Now, I don't know if anyone who does glue their bolt action tank turrets in place, but if you are one of those people, you'll want to reconsider it for the future. So, the first task to building this M10 is the tracks. I like to cut out only the number of pieces I know I can handle without mixing up which is which. Then I'll clean them up with my hobby knife, which I decided not to show here, for the most part to save time for the actual assembly in the video. But for those brand new to assembly, never cut all the pieces out at once. Use hobby cutters to cut the few pieces out that you want to glue together first, and a hobby knife, which is not the same as an X-Acto knife, or a mold line remover, to clean up the excess sprue left during the cutting process, and then dry fit the pieces together before using plastic glue to then seal the pieces together one at a time. Dry fitting allows you to see which pieces should go together first when it isn't clear on the guide, and where exactly the pieces should go in the first place. For example, it turns out that piece 35 on the sprue, which is that big piece of track I'm holding, is actually piece 36, and piece 36 is actually piece 35. I wasn't sure when I was building it if I'd simply mixed up the two pieces somehow, which is why I start building the second track at the same time so I can properly assemble them. But now that I'm watching myself, I can confirm that I did indeed cut the pieces correctly, and it is the assembly guide that has the numbers switched. And now I feel better knowing it wasn't me. I also like to place the pieces on their corresponding image on the assembly guide as a secondary measure to not mix them up. However, if you do lose track of which piece is which, these pieces not only fit into place pretty darn well, they have indents and nubs to attach to those indents that will fit just so if they're placed correctly. I absolutely suggest dry fitting these pieces together before you actually glue them together, so you know for certain that everything is going to go together well. That doesn't mean that the track will fit incredibly well together anyway, because of flashing and a slight warp, which is why I like to assemble this with thin plastic cement, so I can apply layers of the plastic glue after I've attached the pieces initially together to create a better bond between the pieces. But these tracks do still require a little bit of patience, as you'll likely have to hold the pieces together until they have dried to get a good, even seal. There are things that can help you hold it together, but the tracks are a little bit particular, so you may just have to use your fingers and be patient. Watch something while you're assembling. Assembling the one track was just like the other, and I did need to hold both ends of each track in place until fully dry, so you want to keep that in mind for yourself. Though you could also use elastic bands to help keep them in place while they dry. I didn't think that would be quite as good as my hands in this case, but you could. Or fill in a gap with putty after it's dried, or add dirt texture paint later on in the painting process if you found any part you still weren't quite happy with. There's lots of options for tracks. They would have gotten damaged in the war all the time. I did find that this kit had a relative amount of flashing on its pieces. That's when extra plastic from the molding process is left on the piece and you need to shave it away. So if you see a thin sheet of plastic in areas that seem to be keeping your pieces from connecting properly, don't be afraid to cut it away. Anything that was meant to be there is in general much thicker. Oh, and I did mention that there were some missing pieces, right? Well, in step C, there are supposed to be two pieces, numbered 53 and 52, that I believe are tow hooks from the looks of them, that should connect to piece 37, which is that long bottom piece of the tank. Well, I looked all over the sprue, and they were nowhere to be found. I haven't built more than one M10 at this time, so I do not know if this is a problem with the sprue in general, or whether mine were just missing for some reason. Anyone who has built M10 Wolverines can let us know in the comments whether they as well were missing from their sprue. But I didn't find any location that they looked to have been broken away either, so I'm not sure. You will need some tweezers for this project, as even my smaller fingers were too large to manage some of the smaller pieces. And another bonus to using plastic glue instead of super glue is that you'll never accidentally stick your fingers to the pieces. And I also found that some pieces, like piece 46, were not exactly clear on where they should be placed. So I hope me assembling it will help you. But I did determine that 46 later on. I determined that 46 is going to be the floor you see when you peek down through the open turret. So it has a very particular place to go. But that is why I don't glue piece 46 until later, when I could finally tell where it was supposed to go. So I skipped a little bit ahead here. I've cut off some more pieces and I'm now attaching pieces to the top of the chassis. And as you can see, there are notches to tell me exactly how each thing goes, which is very good. I personally like assembly guides that show before and after pictures so you can see exactly where the piece is supposed to go. But hey, I suppose it is a World War II tank and you can always look up images to help you have a better idea of what the tank's supposed to look like when you're all said and done. And you can always put a camouflage net over anything that you messed up, it's fine. These two hatches can be left open or closed, but my thoughts were along the lines of, if I left these open, then I'd have to paint the inside black. And I don't really want to do that. And this poor tank destroyer is enough of a grenade basket as it is. Why make it any easier for the enemy to blow the poor thing up? Not that I have to worry much about grenades really when I'm facing off against Tiger tanks or even Panzer IVs, because my opponent Mariette, who has been learning Achtung Panzer with me, loves to roll high for penetration and blows my tank up with just a single round, particularly when she loads a special round. Tip number 1 for people playing Achtung Panzer: hiding your tank hull behind terrain isn't a suggestion, it's a life or death situation. I like that realism very much, actually. You also have time to scoot yourself behind the terrain because she is going to have to spot and then aim and then fire and also load her ammunition. So there really is no excuse, unless you were trying a bold move to get to her side armor, for you not to be behind that darn terrain. Just hope you're lucky, and she is not. If you do try to stay out in the open, absolutely shoot first. On a side note, I am incredibly curious what the third edition of Bolt Action is going to be like. I never had much opportunity to play the previous edition, but I will certainly be diving into this one. I hope you enjoy it with me. This sounds like a great time, actually. To remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and like this video if you have found it educational, or at least entertaining thus far. And here we come to the most tedious part of building this tank, for me anyway. We've got teeny pieces, and the fit of those pieces are not always the best. So no, it's not you, it's them. And sometimes you're dealing with them upside down and then right side up, and the assembly photos are so small it's hard to tell which way up these pieces are supposed to go. And when you think you did it right, you realize the whole thing is upside down and you have to pull the pieces off and put them all right side up again. So make sure you don't pause or stop halfway through this section, because you can easily pull pieces off that have been recently glued on with plastic glue, but it's much harder to do that later on once everything has properly sealed itself together. Not impossible, you can actually use plastic glue to undo the bonds, but much harder. A note about the gun now that we're here, it is a completely separate piece from the turret, as is its gun shield, so that you will have some vertical mobility when the tank destroyer is finished. That mobility isn't functional within games, so you could glue the gun into the turret if you so wanted, but you don't have to. This pintle-mounted HMG, on the other hand, is an optional gun in bolt action. It is assumed to be attached in Achtung Panzer, according to its card, and I personally think the top of the tank destroyer looks like it's missing something when the HMG isn't on it. So I ultimately will probably glue the machine gun in place, particularly since it is so darn small. I feel like if I didn't, I'll lose it. But it is an option, so what you do with it is entirely up to you. So those 3 circles within the open compartment of the turret is where the 3 crewmen will be. So don't accidentally cut them off. And what you see now is the bottom half of the turret. The top half of the turret will have tiny pieces to add as well, and you'll be adding them while the top half is upside down. So make sure you add all the little compartments and containers and whatnot upside down as well. Now, the top of the chassis has to connect to the bottom of the chassis. There are 2 teeny-weeny holes that allow teeny-weeny pegs to attach to them, connecting the top of the chassis to the bottom. But I honestly didn't find those very helpful. They were too small. I think my tank had a little bit of warp in one of the pieces, or maybe both of the pieces, making it such that those teeny-weeny helper pegs did not actually help, but hindered the 2 sections coming together smoothly. So I think you might find it easier to just cut those pegs off. I didn't. I'd put enough glue in there that the teeny pegs had probably dissolved by the time I got the 2 pieces together. But anyway, so after attaching the 2 pieces as best I could with just glue and finger pressure, I decided to use the closest string available to me, which was golden elastic string, because why not? I chose this, however, because I could gently wind it tighter and tighter without too much pressure being left on areas where a lot of glue is drying. So those areas wouldn't be altered as the glue dried because of the, compression of the string. So this brings me to the crew members. I'm building a British and Canadian army, so my crew members were the British. Like I mentioned, it would be very straightforward to magnetize between the British and the US crew if you wanted to do so for some strange reason. You could do it. What I cannot fathom, however, is why one of these crew members has no left arm. At first I thought I must be missing an arm piece, but I'm not. It bothers me. I don't know why it's missing. There seems to be enough room to have kept it on. I suppose no one will notice that the tiny fellow is one-armed. It doesn't look like he lost it in combat. It's just missing. Has this bothered anyone else, or is there something illuminating about the missing arm that I'm just not seeing? Well, anyway, beyond the missing arm, there is also this extra piece I mentioned. It is clearly a pair of pliers of some kind. Maybe for working the tracks. Not sure. They're quite the size, relative to the crew members. But it wasn't in the assembly guide, so you have free rein to put it anywhere you like, I suppose. And now, with everything built, we can add the turret to the chassis with a little lining up and a twisting, and we are done. One M10 Wolverine Tank Destroyer at your service. If you had any questions at all about this model, assembling it or playing it in bolt action or Achtung Panzer, you should leave your question in the comments below. What are your thoughts about this tank destroyer? Are you also mystified by the man with the missing limb? Do you like to keep your hatches open or closed? Though in this case, since they have an open turret already, I see no good reason to have the hatches open. But maybe you have a reason I don't. Would you want to glue the HMG in place or keep it separate in case you don't want to spend the extra points to take it in bolt action? Let me know. Okay, bye. And to everyone still with me at the end, I want to say thank you very much to the patrons and YouTube members and those who tip me for one-time videos. I really appreciate all the support that you give. A lot of this is a venture of love, so any support that you can provide is really, really appreciated. And this is me trying to decide how best to create a thumbnail picture. So I hope you enjoyed that. Okay, bye.